Is lucky girl syndrome just wishful thinking, or is there actual brain science behind consistently affirming that I'm a lucky girl or that opportunities will come my way? The neuroscience is real, but the trend, lucky girl syndrome, might oversimplify it. We'll break down what actually happens in your brain when you practice positive affirmations, plus the dark sides that might come with toxic positivity. Welcome back to Wellness Fixes the Pod. I'm your host, Dr. Kelsey Vick, a board certified orthopedic doctor of physical therapy and a pelvic floor physical therapist. And I've seen this trend everywhere, so I wanted it to do a deep dive on lucky girl syndrome, what it is, the truths about it, and talk about the neuroscience behind it. So it's a fun, sciencey episode based on a trend that is going around that follows sort of the manifestation idea that the more I manifest something, the more good things will happen to me. So let's dive in. What is lucky girl syndrome? It's a manifestation-based practice where daily affirmations are practiced like, I'm so lucky, everything works out for me. It's built on consistently affirming luck and positive outcomes. So we can actually trace lucky girl syndrome back to 1948 when the term self-fulfilling prophecy came about. And I know a lot of us have heard that term if you haven't heard lucky girl syndrome, but a self-fulfilling prophecy is a prediction that influences behavior in ways that causes the prediction to come true. So what is the actual science behind lucky girl syndrome? Are there actual brain changes that happen to affect our behavior and our outcomes and the opportunities that come our way by consistently affirming that we are lucky girls? Let's talk about two super cool studies on self-affirmation. The first one done by Falk et al. In 2015-2016, and they did brain imaging during self-affirmation practices in sedentary individuals who were resistant to health behavior change. And that health behavior change was physical activity. So they took these sedentary individuals and put them through self-affirmation practices focused on their core values. So things like creativity is one of my core values. When I express myself through art or writing, I feel most alive. I value perseverance. When faced with challenges, I remind myself of times I overcame obstacles and proved my resilience. So they took these sedentary individuals first through these self-affirmation practices based on their core values. After, they presented them with education based on what could happen to their bodies should they stay sedentary. And again, remember, these are super resistant individuals to physical activity. Then the researchers mapped what areas lit up in the brain during this education. So they found that self-affirmation increases activity in brain regions associated with positive valuation. So the brain's ability to assign a positive reward or outcome with a certain behavior. Future-oriented affirmations were extra effective at activating those brain regions. They also found that these self-affirmation practices actually reward the brain. So they're heavily tied to our dopamine system, our motivation, reward, pursuit system. In another study by Cascio et al. In 2016, they looked at fMRI imaging of brain regions during high priority self-affirmation versus low priority self-affirmations. And high priority are those tied to your priority core values. Low priority are those tied to values that aren't as high up on your list. So they found that self-affirmations focused on those high priority values and core values activated regions in the brain associated with reward processing. They also found that future-oriented affirmations were powerful, and they found that the behavior change that followed from these practices was actually due to those self-affirmation practices. They took sedentary individuals to see whether or not they would perform physical activity after, or be more likely to perform physical activity after these self-affirmation practices. And they also found that self-affirmation practices help to create meaningful behavior change in the form of physical activity for sedentary individuals who are extremely resistant to that behavior change. So why do these studies actually matter to lucky girl syndrome? Even if you are resistant to change in your life, these studies show that the most resistant individuals still benefited from these self-affirmation practices within their brain that elicited behavior change after. We also find that high priority core value affirmations are most effective in addition to future-oriented affirmations. So these are two pretty landmark studies that actually showed how self-affirmations affect our brains, not just through self-affirmation practice and behavior change, but actually mapping the brain to see what areas lit up. Speaking of the brain, let's talk about a very key component in lucky girl syndrome and in just filtering out certain information that we're presented with every day. Let's talk about the reticular activating system, which is like your brain's filter. So it's a network of nerve pathways in the brainstem, and it acts as your brain's gatekeeper for information. So We are presented with so much information throughout the day and moment by moment. Even the temperature, even little particles of air that pass over us, we are presented with all of that information. And the reticular activating system helps us decide what to focus on. So in daily life, you might notice this in this silly Cybertruck example, but let's say you buy a Cybertruck, or in my case, my nephews love Cybertrucks. And I know that my nephews love Cybertrucks. And now every time I look around, I see a Cybertruck. And it's not necessarily that there are more Cybertrucks on the road now. It's just that my reticular activating system, my RAS, is cued to notice those more because I now have this emotional significance to a Cybertruck because I know that my nephews really enjoy viewing a Cybertruck. So we can think of it like selective attention, not necessarily magic. Just because I'm thinking of Cybertrucks does not mean that more Cybertrucks are on the roads. It just means that my brain is actually cued to look for those a little bit more. So when you affirm that I'm lucky or good things happen to me or opportunities come my way, the RAS actually activates. Your brain starts scanning for evidence that confirms this belief. You notice opportunities, connections, and positive moments that you might have previously filtered out. So there's a power in this. You do actually notice more opportunities and more good things that come your way when your RAS is cued for this lucky girl syndrome. However, there's also a little bit of a pitfall in that it can also selectively filter out opposing views to that lucky girl syndrome. So it's this selective attention where you notice more opportunities and are ignoring any threats that go against that I am lucky, good opportunities come my way affirmations. So this can lead to confirmation bias. And I know a lot of us have heard about confirmation bias and understood it, but it's a very real thing when it comes to lucky girl syndrome and how our brain is actually filtering out information, deciding what to prioritize and what to ignore. So confirmation bias is the brain's tendency to seek, interpret, and favor information that confirms existing beliefs. And on the flip side, it also dismisses or downplays any beliefs or experiences that contradict our beliefs. So there was a study done in 2020 that actually found there's an unbalanced scale when it comes to confirmation bias. So the brain actually significantly updates beliefs and expectations when we experience another opportunity or thing in our environment that confirms our existing beliefs. So there's a major upside towards those beliefs that we already have. When we're faced with something that contradicts those beliefs, the brain actually downplays that a little bit. So it is on our side. It cheers us on for those confirming beliefs, but then it also might hide or might downplay some of those contradicting beliefs. So it's an unbalanced scale, and the brain's basically selectively filtering what we confirm versus what contradicts what our existing beliefs are. So essentially, the brain might downplay what we consider bad news because it goes against our existing beliefs, and it might upplay good news that confirms our existing beliefs. So in highly optimistic people, the right inferior frontal gyrus shows reduced activity when receiving negative information. So the brain literally dampens the signals for setbacks, and it creates a selective filtering of this reality. So for those of you guys who do participate in the Lucky Girl affirmations, you remember the good things, confirmation of your affirmations. You rationalize or forget the bad things. It was temporary. The universe is teaching me. This feels real because the brain is actually processing that information differently. So it's a good thing in that it reaffirms usually some of those uplifting beliefs, but it's also a bad thing because you lose objective assessment of situations because your brain's actually processing negative information differently than that positive information. So this can possibly lead to poor decision making and just not looking at a situation from the whole picture because your brain's literally processing it in a different way. Switching gears a little bit to neuroplasticity and positive thinking. Does positive thinking actually change our brains? We know that it lights up certain areas, but can it actually rewire certain pathways, certain existing pathways that we already have in our brains? So what is neuroplasticity? The brain's ability to physically reorganize and form new neural connections throughout life. So our brain is plastic, it's adaptable. It actually can change depending on what inputs it receives. So it's been shown that repeated positive affirmations strengthen neural pathways associated with optimism. So we can think of it like exercising a mental muscle. You guys know I talk a lot about physical muscle building and how our nerves connect to our muscles in order to contract the muscles, and how the first little bit of strength gains that we might experience in a physical activity program or a strength training program is actually not more muscle cells or an increase in muscle size. It's actually better connection between our nerves and our muscles. We can think of that when it comes to neuroplasticity and positive affirmations. Research on synaptic plasticity shows positive thinking literally increases synaptic connections, and brain imaging shows strengthened neural pathways with consistent practice. This is why fake it till you make it has some scientific basis. You're rewiring your brain. As far as the timeline goes, it does not happen overnight. We need consistent practice to help rewire our brains and use those positive affirmations to create meaningful change within our brains. And there's, of course, genetic and individual variation within how plastic our brains actually are. So we've talked a lot about optimism and how positive affirmations can actually strengthen the neural pathways associated with optimism, and how optimistic individuals see opportunities and good things happening to them, but might also have a brain that filters out more negative information or dampens some of the bad news that we might get. So what is optimism bias? 80% of humans have a natural tendency to overestimate positive outcomes and underestimate negative ones. And this, again, is in our brains. It's actually our brains that help to control how much we pay attention to good news and how little we pay attention to bad news. So there's a few different brain regions involved, but two of the primary, the rostral anterior cingulate cortex, the RACC, and that region monitors subjective importance of future events. And then there's the amygdala, and we've talked about the amygdala a lot, but it processes emotions related to future events. So there's strong connections between both of these areas when we are future-oriented with those positive affirmations. So a study done in 2007 found that the RACC shows more activation when people imagine positive versus negative events. The stronger the RACC activation, the more optimistic the person. And they conclude that this might actually be an evolutionary advantage. The more optimistic we are, the more likely we are to pursue certain goals and go after certain things like food. Whereas pure pessimism might actually lead to paralysis and depression and just challenges with pursuing certain goals. The brain having evolved with a bias of optimism actually helps us continue moving, continue evolving, continuing to pursue certain goals. So in folks with depression, they actually lose optimism bias. They exhibit depressive realism, more accurate, but maybe more pessimistic interpretation of what's going on around them. And this actually shows that this system is real, since it does break down during mental health challenges like depression. So we can't talk about all of these cause and effects, lucky girl syndrome, positive affirmations, optimism, without at least mentioning placebo. Placebo effects are a massive part of how our minds influence our bodies. So how do placebos work? From a basic standpoint, you have an expectation. There are changes that happen in your brain chemistry with that expectation that elicits a physical change. So fMRI studies, brain imaging studies shows that the placebo actually activates the actual reward system in the brain. And that reward system heavily utilizes dopamine, which can help activate naturally occurring opioid systems within our body. So that can lead to reduced pain, better immune function, lower stress hormones. And that is this overarching perspective of how placebo and how our expectation, even if it's not really there, influences a change in our bodies. So there are, of course, a lot of studies done on placebo, but a few ones that I want to highlight, especially for this episode. Hotel housekeepers told that their job counted as exercise actually lost weight despite not even having any behavior change. They were still doing their same job description, but once they were told that it was exercise, they actually lost weight. Patients given fake cream by friendly, competent doctors, rashes were improved. So these expectations, or when we're told something and we're given this education on something and we truly believe it, that can change the outcome, whether it's a behavior change, a physiology change, a neurological change. There is a real way that placebo works within our brains and bodies. So for lucky girl syndrome, your expectation of luck activates similar brain systems. This can genuinely improve health markers and motivation. If we perceive that we're lucky and we expect to be lucky, this can actually have a cascading effect on the rest of our brain and body and how it functions. But it's not actually necessarily manifesting an external reality or changes external to you. It's an internal change that happens because of your internal expectation, not outwardly. We're getting into a lot of neuroscience today and psychology concepts. So let's talk about learned helplessness versus learned optimism. And any of you guys who were in Psych 101 or Psych 102, like those very intro psychology courses in undergrad, know about learned helplessness. But I don't know if I really remember talking about learned optimism. But learned optimism definitely plays a role in Lucky Girl Syndrome. So what is learned helplessness? So there's foundational learned helplessness research that talks about how repeated failure affects motivation and mental health. When people experience repeated failure or lack of control, they begin to believe they actually have no control, which perseverates the cycle of not actually putting in any effort. Learned optimism is the antidote. It's teaching people to challenge negative thoughts when they come, adopting patterns that help them explain negative thought patterns and view them as temporary setbacks versus this is who I am, this is a part of me, this is never going to change. And learned optimism can be learned and practiced to help as the antidote to learned helplessness. So how does all this talk on Lucky Girl Syndrome actually relate to learned optimism and learned helplessness? Practicing I'm a lucky girl is a form of learned optimism. It reframes situations more positively and shifts from helplessness to more of your own agency. You have control over how lucky you are and the opportunities that you partake in that create this lucky girl. However, just saying it doesn't replace action and effort. We can't just use I'm a lucky girl to lead to learned optimism to create change. We actually need to still put in that action and effort. However, it does increase the likelihood that you will take action. So where does the Lucky Girl Syndrome trend go wrong? And I think my primary concern with it is the fact that we are using verbal or written affirmations to manifest an external reality. And that's just not the case. We've seen that verbal affirmations, especially positive ones related to core values that are future oriented, can rewire our brains. That's an internal change. But what we also fail to recognize with Lucky Girl Syndrome is the external environment and the opportunities and the circumstances and the friends and the internal changes that happen to get us to be that lucky girl. So think about a recent job promotion or for me, grad school. If I thought, oh my gosh, I'm so lucky because I got into PT school, that is discrediting my hard work, all of the mentors that got me there, all of my friends that helped push me through those hard times. It's not necessarily that I said I'm a lucky girl, I got into PT school. It's that I put in the hard work and effort. I had mentors and different friends and my family to push me along the way. It's a whole lot bigger than just saying these verbal words and expecting change to occur external to us and external to our hard work. So this is called causal illusion, but it's when people perceive causal relationships between unrelated events. So I affirmed something and then this good thing happened. The affirmation actually caused this good thing to happen. When in reality, success and reaching our goals and becoming a lucky girl has multiple factors that go into it. Luck, privilege, effort, timing, skill, support system. So when people attribute everything to mindset, they miss the other factors that go into it. So I think the sweet spot between complete lucky girl syndrome and actually maximizing the way that our brains are structured and the neuroscience that goes into it should be called balanced optimism. So this is not positive thinking without action. This is positive thinking with action. And research actually supports this. And it actually also supports that positive affirmations with action is better than negativity and negative thoughts with that same action. So positive affirmations do help. So we do want realistic optimism. We want to not be so shielded from the bad news that might come our way. We also want to recognize certain emotions that come up, even if they are contradicting to that lucky girl syndrome. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to be angry. Lucky girls are sad. Lucky girls are angry. But we need to understand that negative emotions don't need to be pushed away, because I do feel like lucky girl syndrome can have this aura of toxic positivity. Action, action, action. That's another key component. We need to be action oriented. Self-compassion. We also need to be able to be kind to ourselves when things don't work out and not flip to those learned helplessness behaviors of this didn't work out. Nothing's ever going to work out. I can't change anything that happens to me. We need to be a little bit cautious of switching to that learned helplessness perspective. And I also think it's important to recognize your hard work and effort and the support systems, the external environment, the timing of things happening that got you to whatever goal you were trying to reach. So if lucky girl syndrome and the neuroscience behind this trend appeals to you, here's a way to maximize some of how your brain works with this trend of lucky girl syndrome. Number one, leverage the reticular activating system intentionally. Set clear, specific intentions, not just luck, but actually like smart, attainable, measurable goals. And your brain will help you notice certain opportunities that come your way or certain experiences that might affirm what your intentions are. But you have to take actual action from them. Just noticing them is not going to help them come to fruition. In order to build actual neural pathways with positive affirmations, consistency matters. We need to tie these affirmations to core values. Remember, those high priority values are the ones that create those deeper, stronger connections. We want to use future-oriented language. So an example is, my skills and hard work attract good opportunities, not just I'm lucky. Number 3, use positive affirmations as motivation, not replacement for effort. Let them boost confidence and motivation, but follow through with actual concrete actions. They're a tool for mental health, not a magic spell. Number 4, stay emotionally authentic. Allow negative emotions when they arise, process them rather than suppressing them, and use them as information. What am I actually learning from this? Understanding that it is also temporary. Acknowledge reality. Effort, skill, timing, and circumstance all matter. So does luck, but there are external systemic factors that go into play. And number 6, combine it with all the other practices that help to influence our bodies and brains as a whole. Things like exercise, sleep, quality relationships, all of those also go into play. So the bottom line, here's what we know from neuroscience about lucky girl syndrome. Your thoughts literally change your brain structure. Positive affirmations activate reward centers and can shift attention. Optimism is partially hardwired, but can be learned. And expectations genuinely influence outcomes, like the placebo effect showed. What neuroscience doesn't support: pure magical thinking, mindset is the only factor in success, replacement of action with affirmation, and suppression of negative emotions. So I'm a lucky girl can work if you understand it as I'm going to intentionally notice the opportunities that can help me create my own luck through the actions that I'm going to perform. But it won't work if it means I'll sit back and good things will come to me. It has to have action. The most powerful version of lucky girl syndrome combines positive affirmations, positive mindset with action. So you can train your brain to be more resilient, motivated, and opportunity conscious through activating certain brain regions that make you more goal-driven, more pursuit-driven, more reward-driven, and also alerting certain parts of your brain, the filter of your brain, to see different opportunities, but also realize that with some of that optimism comes a little bit of a dampening of some of the bad news or contradictory evidence that we might get presented with. And always remember that mindset needs to be followed by action. It's not mindset alone. So I hope you guys enjoyed this deep dive into lucky girl syndrome. I know I loved pulling all the research and learning about the actual neuroscience involved in creating some of these brain changes. It's a nice little refresher based on a very popular trend right now. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and I'll see you guys again on the next episode of Wellness Big Sis the Pod.